of reoccurring themes. In a truly dark place where nothing's what it seems. The moon is turning into blood and crimson are its beams. Living all alone in gothic dreams. Alone and on my own in gothic dreams.
All right, welcome to the Weird Show tonight, guys. This is the Sunday edition. The Weird Show. I'm Russell Dowden, your host through this fast-moving, unexpected journey of total weirdness that we often call here the Weird Show. Publisher and editor of Weird Magazine, and interviewing tonight another publisher of all things weird and paranormal. Guest that's been familiar to our programs in the past. He's been on Weird Radio with me before. He's been on the Weird Show some years ago. And our guest tonight is Timothy Green Beckley, a.k.a. Mr. UFO, is going to be joining us here in just a moment. I'm going to introduce a little background on Tim. He's been in the paranormal. He's a pioneer in paranormal, guys. So Tim Beckley, really a long time publisher of all things paranormal. He's been often called also the paranormal or the Hunter S. Thompson of UFOlogy, and that was from none other than Nancy Burns, the editor of UFO Magazine. So he has been at an early age in his life saved by an invisible force. The house that he was raised in was thought to even be haunted. His grandfather has seen a headless horseman. He's had experiences with UFOs, Men in Black. But Tim also underwent an out of body experience as early as age 6. Anyway, I gonna tune him in here in a second. Let's bring in Tim. Just a second, guys. Here. All right. Are you there, Tim?
Yes, indeed.
All right. Welcome. Our guest tonight is Timothy Green Beckley, and also known as Mr. UFO. How are you doing, Tim?
Well, under the circumstances, pretty good. I'm sitting here in my recliner looking at the highway. Actually, I don't even have a window in my apartment. It overlooks the side of a brick building, but I have a channel here. I guess it has steady cams from all over the Manhattan area. So I get to look at Times Square and I get to look at the West Side Drive, but it doesn't quite get as far as Texas. So,
well, you are speaking to my audience. Is a lot of it's here in Central Texas, South Texas. We've got viewers from all around the state, but yeah, we've been fans of yours. You and I have talked for many years.
Well, we have.
It's been a long time. It's been a few years.
It has been a while. I've been reading your magazines on and off. Rockstar magazine, which I should be on the cover of actually, but I won't push. I won't push it at this point. You know, I was also I'm also promoted in the days of glam and glitter. Promoted a few of the local Manhattan bands here. Mm-hmm. Mainly one of the groups was the Harlots of 42nd Street. Now that's a good name for a glam band. And I'm also on the Edgar Winter's Frankenstein album, which went platinum, except I didn't play an instrument.
What did you do on that album, Tim?
Well, there is a song on there. There's a song on there called "We All Had a Really Good Time." And on the song is background music, is people laughing and chatting and carrying on. The record company put us in the recording studio. I think I was there with the Chambers Brothers and Bette Midler and Rick Derringer. Gave us a couple of bottles of liquor, got us drunk, recorded our conversations and our just hanging out. And it's the background. Well, I can't call it music, but let's just say music on that particular song. We all had a really good time, and you'll find it on the Frankenstein album, I'm there clinking a set of keys on an ashtray, if I remember correctly. So,
every little bit helps.
well, I'm on a platinum album. How many other people could say that, right?
Well,
But I guess tonight we're here to talk about the weird. How about the weird and the unusual, and to some people, I suppose, very frightening.
Well, sometimes it is frightening, Tim. And I mean, you are kind of a renowned expert on all of this stuff. Guys, if you haven't heard of Timothy Green Beckley, just enter his name under Google or even Amazon. If you go on to Amazon, I'm on the Amazon. I'm screening the Amazon page. So there's all these different books that you've published.
Well, we have I think about 337 books. Now that's just the printed version. When I had a little bit of a tussle with Amazon because they were late in sending out books, I said, I have over 300 books with you, and the guy said, well, including your ebooks, it's over 500.
Only 500 books.
Only 500. But remember, this is over the course of about 50 years. So it really doesn't amount to all that much. And I didn't write them all. I mean, I've co-authored a lot of them and contributed to them. But we also have a lot of other authors that we publish, like T. Lam Singh Karampa, The Mystic from Tibet, Brad Steiger, and the Sherry Hansen Steiger. She just passed away. I don't know if you know that or not. But Sean Castile, Tim Schwartz, who you've had on the program, and the mysterious Commander X, who claims a background in military intelligence. He's our key go-to person on conspiracies.
And all of these books, and that was really one of the first things I wanted to ask you tonight. Is just how many books have you published? How many have you written yourself?
Well, I have not kept accurate count of it, so I couldn't actually tell you that. But you can see my author's page is knee deep. It'll take you 5 minutes to go through that. I would say a good 50 books where I was just the only person on the cover, and then I don't know, another 75 or so that I contributed to, and I've edited them all. But I'm semi-retired now. I only put out 2 new books a month.
Only 2 a month now.
Only two, and
well, I've published, I think, as a publisher myself of magazines. I'm somewhere around. We did 101 of Weird, and we started doing Rockstar, and I've done about 44 Rockstars. We've been publishing a sports one in last few years. I've done about 23 or 4 of those. I did about 7 issues of Paranoid magazine for a little bit there before we started Rockstar.
Yeah, and I remember that one. Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, Sean, I know, contributed a lot of articles.
Yeah, he sure did.
To that, yeah. Well, I not to toot my own horn, but I edited over the course of many, many years about 30 different.
Oh, there, we lost him on the phone call there. Stand by. Let me get him back on. Oh, that's funny. I haven't done this with a phone call yet tonight. That's the first time we wanted to get this on. Let's call him back.
It's the Men in Black, no doubt.
Oh, that's what it was. It was the Men in Black that kicked you off of there.
Yeah, just what I was starting to say, that over the course of the years, I edited something like 30 different newsstand magazines. Unfortunately, outside of UFO Universe, that went for 11 years, most of them, like Moped Action and Front Page Disasters and Soap Opera Daily, didn't last more than a couple of issues. They were in and out. I hit the end of what they would call the Pulp Magazine era.
That's right.
Yeah, and there are. Well, I was going to say there are no more pulp magazines, but there are hardly any magazines at all. You got to wander down to Barnes and Noble to find. There are no newsstands. Even here in New York, the last big newsstand, the Gem Spa, which had been there ever since I can remember, closed about 2 weeks ago.
Wow!
So,
wow!
Yeah. You can't even find the little newsstands that used to be like in the middle of the street. They sell lottery cards and potato chips and stuff like
Tim,
that.
These types of publishing like that is a rare breed, and even at my age and for the 18 years that I've been publishing, I mean, it's a rare it's a rare thing to see that in this day and age, and and then paranormal publishing in along of
my
itself is
goodness.
very rare.
Yeah. Well, I don't think the only magazine today. Well, the last printed magazine in English went out of business about 2 years ago. It was published in Australia. It was UFOlogy magazine, and it was a quite nice magazine. We had an article in there every issue or so, and that's the one, the last one that folded. The only two things that I could think of would be the 14 Times out of England, which is not all UFOs, and then we have nearby here Weird New Jersey, which you've probably seen Mark and Mark on TV, and they still keep that going, and they have actually more subscribers and readers than the 14 Times. You wouldn't think that, but they do, because they get out there and they hustle the streets of New Jersey and nearby communities themselves.
Well, let's ask a couple of questions here. I know that you've been in the paranormal for a long time. Kind of, how did you start off in publishing and going back to your younger years when you started? How did things begin for our listeners of the Weird Show tonight? How did young Timmy Beckley get things going?
Well, let's see. I guess you would have to kind of go back to my grandfather on my father's side of the family. He had the sighting of a headless horseman behind the barn in Kentucky. Now we figure it might have been a Confederate soldier whose head was knocked off by a cannonball or something like that. Because the Confederacy wanted Kentucky to join the Confederacy, the Southern states, and they didn't want to, and so the Union sent troops in there so that wouldn't happen, and they did have some skirmishes. So that's, but the family never talked about it, because my dad and his dad were a Southern Baptist, and if you're a Southern Baptist, you don't believe in things like headless ghosts or the supernatural in general, and if you do, it all has to be because of demons or satanic or something like that. But then let's see, at the age of 3, I did have a paranormal experience where I think I say guardian angel, but some force saved my life. We were driving down to Kentucky, my mother and my dad doing the driving, of course, because I was only 3 years old, and they had set me up a seat and blanket and toys in the back of the car, and it took about 3 days to drive down there. Now, on the third night, it was getting kind of late, and but they weren't that far away from their destination of Shelbyville, which is, of course, where the Colonel of the chicken is from. Colonel Sanders. In fact, they knew they knew each other because of Shelbyville being a rather small town. Anyway, it was getting rather dark, and my father wanted to continue driving. He just wanted to get down there, but my mother said, "No, you must stop now." Well, my mother, being a good front seat driver, my dad pulled over, and so we stopped for the evening. Now, the fog rolled in. It was a very foggy evening. That was another reason my mother didn't want to continue. And when the fog lifted in the morning, it turned out that we were right on the side of a cliff, I'm told. And if they had gone another foot, I would not be here talking to you this evening. So I would say that there was some force, even at that age, that perhaps it was responsible for saving me, knowing that I had great plans in store later on in life. Now, I guess the most important incident that stands out in my mind is at the age of 10, I had my first of 3 UFO sightings. It was a warm evening in July or August of, I think that would be about 1957. And in those days, we had no air conditioner, so we all just sat out on the front stoop and talked to the neighbors and so forth until it got the sun went down and the twilight time, and it got a little bit cooler. So then we would go inside. Well, at some point, somebody came running up to the stairs where we were seated, and pointed out overhead two objects in the sky, and they rotated in the sky. One was across the street over an abandoned factory building, and the other one was almost directly over the house. And these things just took turns. The one over the house would rotate and go over the factory building across the street, and the one over the factory building would come and hover over the house. Now, I can't tell you that I saw any little green man. There was no landing gear or anything like that. It was just up above the cloud layer, but one of them disappeared. The one across the street, it looked like somebody had pulled the light switch, and eventually it disappeared after about maybe 15 minutes, and we finally went inside the house.
Right.
Okay, well, we thought about it, but what was this? Was it searchlight playing on the clouds? Well, what kind of searchlight? There was no, a mall nearby. There weren't even any malls in those days, and there was no opening of any car lot or anything like that. So there didn't seem to be a logical explanation. Well, a couple of days later, there was a little item in the newspaper, local newspaper, to the effect that other people had seen something strange and unusual in the sky, but the authorities were saying that it was nothing more unusual than a weather balloon. Well, even at the age of 10, I knew that this was not a weather balloon. In fact,
July 8th, 1947.
So it wasn't a weather. Was it a weather balloon or not a weather balloon?
It was not. It was not. It was not a weather balloon. And in all my years of traveling around all over the world, I don't think I've ever seen a weather balloon. I don't even know anybody who's seen a weather balloon. To be honest with you, only when UFOs are reported are there weather balloons in the vicinity.
Oh my God! It's a weather balloon sighting.
Balloon. Oh my God! I'm so frightened as it lets out air. Yeah, but anyway, I started writing to the local newspapers. In those days, if you had a complaint or a gripe or something, you wrote a letter to the editor, and the newspapers, that would be the Home News in New Brunswick and the Trentonian. Now, the Trentonian, which Trenton being the capital of New Jersey, had an editor there who was actually interested in the subject. And boy, was that a rarity in those days. His name was Emil Sloboda, and he worked for the Associated Press. So now he didn't know me from a hole in the wall, and he didn't know that I was only 15 years old. I don't even know if I was 15. And he started publishing the letters, not his letters to the editor, but his editorials. See, and so I started getting calls from people who had sightings and their own experiences and so forth. And I said, well, geez, I ought to put this stuff down and share it with people. So I went out and I bought a mimeograph machine, which I won't even describe to you, but it was a primitive. It was after the Gutenberg press, but it was a rather primitive form of printing where you poured ink into the chamber, and it got. I had more. My mother banished me to the back porch because instead of having fingerprints like blood prints you see at a crime scene, there was ink all over the refrigerator and the wall because it was kind of messy. Anyway, so it started out as like 10 pages, and I printed like 100 copies of the first issue. And before I discovered there were other things in life, and somebody took over the publishing of my magazine, I actually had 1,500 subscribers, which is as many members as APRO had down in Tucson. And it was 40 pages, and we exchanged publications with about 125 similar zines all over the world. And so I was very active in the field. And then Jim Mosley, who published Saucer News, he took over the subscriptions and hired me as managing editor. And I moved to the big city in Manhattan, and started my publishing career. And I also had one of the first, if not the very first, metaphysical New Age occult centers in the country back in the late 1960s. We organized.
Tim, yes. You sound like your story is almost it's very reminiscent in a way to that of Stan Lee's story of getting into comic books.
Oh, yes. Well, yes, it is kind of. Yeah, well, yes, it is. Like I say, it was the tail end of the pulp magazine business. So
Mhm.
yeah, people got, I worked for a fellow. I packaged magazines for a fellow who never read any of the magazines that I put together for him, and he got into the magazine publishing business in a very strange way. He was an accountant for Archie Comics. So
Mhm.
he didn't know anything really about publishing, but he knew how to work a deal with a distributor. And in those days, magazines were selling. Even the poorest magazine would sell 30 or 40,000 copies. So the distributor would pay for your printing. Well, they wouldn't do that anymore. You're lucky.
I wish I could
You're
get
lucky
that
if you can
deal, Tim.
Yeah, yeah. You're lucky if you can find a distributor. I mean, even with the magazines that I put out, I had about 70 or 80 wholesalers around the country. A Playboy magazine put out a publication that went to the trade. It was a list of all the magazine wholesalers in the country. There were about 660 of them, if I remember, and I dealt with about 70 of them directly. Today, I don't know how many there would be, about 7 or 8, perhaps. I don't
Mhm.
even know. I wouldn't even know how to go about getting a national magazine distributed.
It's a lot
Uh,
different nowadays.
yeah, there's one outfit there that we've used, the Ubiquity out of Brooklyn, and I think they get you in Barnes and Noble, and I don't know where else you would get, to be honest with you.
Mhm.
I mean, that's about it. But
But
I still do the books because Amazon has taken over that. Just about the only game in town. And at one point in the mid 1980s, we would print 3,000 copies of any New Age UFO book. And that's not very much. I mean, a big publisher would publish 60,000 or something like that. But to us, it was a 3 or 4 person operation. If we sold those books, we'd go back and reprint. And I had some titles that did very, very well. I advertised like in the Weekly World News and all
right.
these other little pulp magazines on the newsstand. And I had a mailing list at one point of about 110,000 names.
Mhm.
Uh, but little by little, the bookstores started going out of business. Lo and behold, here comes the internet, and everything is suddenly available for free on the internet.
Yeah.
I mean, and which might work if you have a big a niche, something like Huffington Post or something, where you can get a lot of advertising. But in a kind of a publication like we put out, it's almost impossible.
Well,
But
I think your story is very similar to, that whole Stan Lee scenario
yes,
and all of that. I think it's just interesting how a young guy starts publishing and getting
well,
published so
I'll
young.
let you. I'll let you in a little secret. I
Mhm.
failed English in high school.
Is that right?
Yeah, yeah, and most of the guys that I knew in publishing, I mean the actual publishers, they never read their own magazines. Some of them were pretty close to being illiterate because it had very little to do with selling magazines, if anything at all.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Well, let's talk about your Men in Black experiences, and
Oh yeah.
you've covered
Hmm.
this stuff more extensively in the early research days. The
Yes.
earliest days of Men in Black coverage. You were right
Mhm.
there on the beginning of this. Tell us about
W-
your Men in Black.
Well, my first publisher was a gentleman now deceased for many years by the name of Gray Barker.
Hmm.
And Gray Barker in 1956, I believe it was, uh, published a book or wrote a book that was published by Lyle Stewart called "They Knew Too Much About Flying Saucers," and that
That's
was the
right.
first. That was where the term "Men in Black" was coined.
Mhm.
It was coined by, I guess, by Dominic Lucchesi, or one of the guys that hung out with Gray Barker, put out his own little publication called the Caesarean Press. And Albert K. Bender had an organization called the International Flying Saucer Bureau out of Bridgeport, Connecticut.
Mhm.
And it was quite an active organization. He had representatives all over the world, well over 1,000 members. And one day, I was going to say there was a knock on the door, but we're not quite sure whether there was a knock on the door or there was a materialization in his room. But anyway, he was confronted by 3, I would use the word very loosely, gentlemen dressed in black clothing with black hats and sunglasses, pretty much looking like Will Smith, but having nothing whatsoever to do with the movie. It's just not the same thing. Anyway, the three men in black, telepathically, I believe, they also had red blazing eyes, like coal, burning coal. They warned him to stop publishing his magazine. And apparently, he claimed to have found the secret of the flying saucers. He knew where they were coming from. And if you want to know where that is, apparently the North and the South Pole, which is kind of the hollow Earth, concept of flying saucers coming from inside the Earth, which is still a very popular series. We have about 7 or 8 different books on that topic, and especially about Admiral Richard E. Byrd, who was supposedly and the missing diary and all that, and that remains very, very popular with the public. And anyway, Bender shut down the International Flying Saucer Bureau. He refused to correspond with any of the people that he had been in contact with all over the world. And for years, he never spoke about the subject again. He did come out years later with a book called Flying Saucers and the Three Men, where he had conjured up some stories, more of a science fiction story than anything else we kind of believe. I did meet him on one occasion, and he just died a few years ago at the age of 99. He was living in California, but again, he would never talk about the subject. It just I don't know whether it frightened him or not, but now there were after his experience and the book came out, Gray Barker and myself as well started receiving reports from other people, UFO witnesses and all, who said that they were being harassed by either one individual or three men in black, and they often showed up in black Cadillacs, smelling like, even though they might have been 10 years old, it smelled like it just came out of the showroom. And so I started collecting material on this. Now, 1967, there was a big UFO wave on the East Coast here. And there was a gentleman by the name of John J. Robinson who lived over in Jersey City, which is only a scant few miles from where I am located. Now, he worked in a bank here in New York. He would take the PATH train over. And after he left for work, his wife, Mary, would go and do the shopping and the errands. And she reported, and she called me and Jim Mosley at our office a couple of times and said that when she went out, there seemed to be a gentleman dressed in black with the hat and the whole bit, standing in the doorway next to where they lived, apparently monitoring the people going in and out of the building. Now, Jack had been involved in investigating a lot of local UFO cases. In fact, there had been an incident where a group of teenage boys had seen something land in a park, I think in Passaic, New Jersey, and they had seen a couple of little men wandering around the ship or something. And Jack had interviewed them at the scene of the incident. And while they were there, just on the outskirts of the park, apparently there was one of these black cars parked down the block with the window partly down and apparently keeping tabs on the Jack interviewing the witnesses. Okay, so Mary claimed that the strange individual was standing in the doorway. And Jim Mosley and I decided, well, we didn't know whether she was just kind of making this story up to get our attention or not, that we were going to drive over there without letting her know, knowing that we were coming, right? So we left at about 7:30 or 8 in the morning, drove through the Lincoln or Holland Tunnel, got to where they lived on Main Street in Jersey City, and lo and behold, there was a person standing in the doorway pretty much like she described. And Jim Mosley handed me his camera. I stuck it out the window. I took a shot of this person standing in the doorway, which has been published many, many times, and I appeared on the History Channel on UFO Hunters describing this. And Jim said, "Well, why don't we pull around the corner and come back, and you can get out and confront the individual?" Well, it took us maybe about 5 minutes to get around the corner. a little bit of people double parking, garbage trucks on the road, the usual thing that you find at 8:30 and 9 in the morning. By the time we pulled around the street again, the individual was gone, and the black car, which had been parked nearby, had also disappeared. Now, I always say, instead of being frightened by a man in black, I frightened them because they never showed up again outside of Jack and Mary Robinson's house. Although they did have a couple of times, Jack reported to us that his files were rifled through, and they would come home. There didn't seem to be any sign of actual, a breaking or entering. But here would be the files on the floor and all, as if somebody had materialized in the apartment and so forth, just to frighten him. Now, Jack not only was we just mentioned a little bit earlier about the hollow in the earth and Admiral Byrd.
Yep.
Well, one of the things that Jack was interested in was the Shaver mystery and the Hollow Earth mystery.
Mm-hmm.
He was a frequent guest on the Long John Neville show. Now, Long John, many years before Art Bell, had people on contactees who claimed that they went to another planet, or people who had paranormal out of the body experiences and so forth. He was the original all-night talk show host from the late 50s, I guess, all the way maybe to around 1972 or 4 or something like that. And later on, I was a guest on his show a few times. I became friendly with his fourth wife, Candy Jones. And after he passed away, she took over the program, and she always had me on almost every Sunday night. Not, I guess, because I was a spectacular guest, but because nobody wanted to go out on Sunday night. I mean, I went up there in snowstorms. I ran out. Candy Jones, she was one of these mind control victims, if you know about anything about MK Ultra.
Mm-hmm.
But I never heard. She never told. I didn't know anything about that at the time, and she never mentioned it on the air or off the air. So I kind of kicked myself for not being aware what was going on there, But she lived in the same neighborhood as I did, so I remember one night it was like 5 o'clock in the morning, 5:30. It was a blizzard going on outside, so we decided to share a cab going back down to town here. Mm-hmm. And the cabs wouldn't stop. They were slipping and sliding down Broadway. Well, we grabbed the back of the door handle and slid down a little bit down Broadway in the snow until the cab stopped and let us in. But I was on there, quite frequently. And in those days, if you were on a show, I remember one time I said, "Well, Candy, did I get any mail?" And she opened up the drawer to her desk, and there were like 400 letters and postcards in there, which is quite a response. I don't know if you get that from anyone anymore. Maybe if you're on Oprah's program.
But you were with Jim Mosley when you took that picture of the Men in Black.
That's correct.
I have that image on screen for Facebook viewers to see that. So and this picture here says courtesy of Timothy Green Beckley. But yes, this is that image that you captured.
Yes. If you want the whole story, nothing but the truth. So help me, so help me, space people. The book is the UFO Silencers: Mysteries of the Men in Black. It's been out for quite a number of years, but it's got some very interesting and frightening stories in there. So that's the go-to book if you want to find out all about the incident in Jersey City with Jack and Mary Robinson. And the solo Men in Black, I guess they weren't important enough to get 3 visitors. They only got 1.
Well, there's lots of books on, Men in Black and UFOs. And Tim, you've probably published many of them. Our guest tonight is Timothy Green Beckley, known as Mr. UFO. He's published over 500 books. What's the name of your podcast, by the way? I saw that.
Oh my goodness.
You do a thing, All Things Paranormal. What is your podcast?
Well, no. Well, it's Tim Schwartz and I every Thursday night at 10 o'clock Eastern, 7 Pacific, over KCORradio.com. We do an hour podcast called Exploring the Bizarre. And if you want to hear a program, now I can't say that it's strictly UFOs because we do have other. We had a lady on the other evening who had some great conspiracy stories to tell, and we got into the JFK assassination and so forth. But I like UFOs myself. We've had some wonderful guests on. We had a lady from the Queensland UFO group over in Australia. That organization is probably maybe the longest running in the world. It's a toss-up between that group, which has been in existence for 56 years, and CUPS, which stands for the Cleveland UFOlogy Project out of Cleveland, Ohio. And that might be that's certainly the oldest in the United States. Most UFO groups come and go. MUFON has been around for quite a number of years under many different directors and leaders and so forth. But the original groups like APRO, the Area Phenomena Research Organization, and NICAP, back in the early, they're long since gone. Although they do NICAP. I don't know. There's somebody who uses the name on the internet, so I can't say that NICAP doesn't exist, but it's certainly not the same group.
Let me ask you, we recently posted, Tim, on an article that you'd written, watch out, Space Brothers warn we will not be allowed to set foot on the moon. And was the U.S. Space Command or NASA told to stay away from the moon by a reptilian? The story is a reptilian ET group or some ET group.
No, it wasn't. No, not really. No, it wasn't really a reptilian group. Now, for years, I have kind of cozied up to the UFO channelers and the contactees. Now, if you ask me, what is my belief here? Well, I do have some beliefs. It's subjects to change, but I think of myself as a historian and an archivist, collecting this material from all points of view, and that's enabled me to get along with both sides. The so-called nuts and bolts guys that still push the ETH extraterrestrial point of view on this. That these Stanton Friedman, they're coming here from some other planet or some other star system, which has lost its popularity in recent years because if you follow the UFO the stories and movement, people there are a few sightings by pilots and stuff like that. But the majority of reports made by individuals all over the world usually contain something of a very paranormal or magical nature. I mean, the UFO visitors come at night. We call them the bedroom invaders. They come through your wall to take you up through the ceiling, and they levitate you on board the craft. There's all kinds of paranormal hanky-panky going on, some of even a sexual nature, and it's all very weird. How about that? Isn't that
indeed weird?
Catch all phrase. And I don't know. So the idea that they're coming here from somewhere else always intrigued me, but it's nothing that you could really prove. Anyway, I was in contact with several dozen individuals who would channel or claim that they were in touch with the Space Brothers, usually members of the Ashtar Command. Now, the Ashtar Command is made up of very Aryan-looking individuals. They kind of remind me of soap opera stars. Very chiseled faces and fine features, and all very attractive and handsome and pretty and so forth. But the stories that they told, of course, some of them were very incredible. They claimed that they went on board the spaceships and they traveled to other planets, and they were given messages, and a lot of the messages had to do with future events, predictions. I mean, there were no Nostradamuses, but it turned out, and I was working with Sherry Hansen Stager on this book, UFO and Psychic Revelations for the 21st Century. She had been a student of Edgar Cayce and knew his son, and she passed away. I wondered why I hadn't heard from her, and then I found out that she went into the hospital and she never left. But she pointed out to me that Edgar Cayce was actually a UFO, a channeler and contactee, and that's something that is not pushed by his organization, and most people don't realize that. But he was in touch with beings from the planet Arcturus, and he went there not aboard a flying saucer, but in his dreams. He believed that you could travel vast distances, and that's certainly quite a vast distance, not by going there in a physical ship, but by going there mentally or through astral projection or out of the body travel. I don't know how he identified it exactly, but he did, of course, have very many predictions all about the rising of Atlantis. And, and anyway, we tried to compare a lot of these reports that were coming in and a lot of these prophecies and predictions. And I would keep a running list. And most of these the individuals, these channels and all, didn't know each other. So they didn't know what the channel in New England was saying compared to the channel in the Palm Springs of California, or one down in Miami or something. And a lot of the predictions were similar. I mean, they talked about events that were to come. And one of the things that they all told me, or a lot of them did, is that the Space Brothers had said that we would not be allowed to go back and colonize the moon. That they did not want us going there because we are not a peaceful civilization, and they were afraid that we would take our warlike activities to their base on the lunar surface. Okay, so I gave a press conference back in, I think this would have been 1969. I was invited to speak at the Congress of Scientific Ufologists, which actually is kind of a funny name because there were no scientists on the in the group at all that I can think of. It was me and Jim Mosley and Jack Robinson and Rick Hilberg out of Ohio and Al Manning, Robert Easley, and a few other people whose names escape me because they're not around or they're deceased now. But
well, I have the article pulled up on the website from the New York Daily and the Sunday Gazette Mail. The image is on screen. So tell us about that. This must be related to the press conference you had.
Well, yes. It turned out that it was picked up by the Daily News. Now, in those days, the Daily News had a circulation of about 3 or 4 million. That's what people knew what a newspaper was. And the reason that it had such a large circulation was because it came out in the evening. And it was used as the racing form for people who bet at the track. Okay, I mean, that's why I think most of the people bought it, and it told you who was what jockey was riding what.
Well, the headline says, "Watch out! Aliens using moon as base will prevent lunar colonization." Ufologists warn U.S.
Well, isn't that true though? We've never returned. We've never been back to the moon.
That's right.
We can do everything else. And here we're talking about going into space and settling on Mars and all this. We don't talk about the moon. It's like, well, we know that the moon. We know that the moon is hollow anyway. I always thought it was made out of green cheese. But we had a fellow on our program a couple of weeks ago who said that the moon was an artificial satellite and that it was hollow. And I could go along with that. In fact, I remember that one of the space capsules, I think, was jettisoned to the moon's surface.
Yes,
and it rang like a bell or something. Yeah. Okay, so the moon is hollow, just like the Earth is.
Yeah, they said it rang for days.
Yeah, so the moon is hollow, just like the Earth is, and I say that somewhat facetiously, but I don't know. I'm not a cosmonaut or an astronaut. I'm a journalist, and I take notes. I take very good notes, and I turn it into books and magazine articles.
Well, what do you think about Trump's creating this new space force? This is something that I thought is interesting. If we were to get some kind of disclosure at all.
My God, if we let him do anything, we'll lose. We've lost the battle before we started.
Well, did the Space Force This is I'm looking on YouTube here. It just says, did Space Force copy the Starfleet logo from Star Trek? Anyway, the point I'm making, it looks very similar.
Oh, well, but other people have done that. I can't say that he's the only copycat, because there are other nations and all that have used that same symbol. I guess it's a popular symbol. So it's incorporated. I won't say that he copied it, because everybody else has as well. But what exactly are you going to do with the Space Force? I don't know. It doesn't make much sense. I mean, who are you battling? Unless it's the evil aliens, which you can find out all about in our UFO hostilities book, because there've been a lot of cases over the years where UFOs have been hostile. They're not all fuzzy little ETs. They're not all members of the Air Star Command. Some of them. So some of them are pretty nasty critters. There have been people that have been burned by UFOs. There are any number of plane crashes which might have been caused by the UFOs. Cars have been stalled. Massive blackouts have occurred. In fact, there was a Hollywood actor, maybe not all that well known, but he'd been in a number of movies. I think he just passed away maybe a year or two ago in his 90s. His name was Stuart Whitman, and I guess he's best known for his role in The Sound and the Fury. And I talked to him on the I talked to him on the telephone for probably an hour or so, and the story goes, which was in the press at the time, but I wanted to get all the full details. He had just arrived in New York City, and he had taken a room, I'm going to say at the Plaza, but it was a hotel off of Central Park. I don't know exactly which one for sure. He was going to go out to for the evening to have dinner or something, but he was tired, so he decided to take a nap. Well, he looked at the clock, and it was lit up like you find in a hotel room, and he shut his eyes and he dozed off. And the next thing he knows, he hears this humming sound coming from somewhere nearby. And he opens his eyes, and the room is dark. Even the little flashing light on the phone and all is that tells the time is off. And it's dark outside, in New York City, even if you're on the 30th floor in a hotel, there's lights, man. There's lights everywhere. Let me tell you. And so he pulled the curtain aside, and there outside of his hotel window was an egg-shaped object, and he heard this voice. Now the voice didn't speak to him, verbally, because they would have had to have an awful loud speaker. And there was no Bluetooth in those days, so it was apparently, according to him, a telepathic message. And this was on the night of the blackout in 1965, and he could see that the city was totally dark when he pulled the curtain aside, and the voice said that they had been responsible for the blackout, that they wanted to show us that they could. Prevent. They wanted us to do away with our nuclear weapons and live peaceful in harmony with nature and other people. And I call it it's a sweetness and light, a message. But he spoke to them for a few minutes, and then the ship had disappeared, and he did go to the media and tell his story. Now, some people thought that, well, he was making it up to get attention, but I don't know as if that's necessarily true. UFOs weren't reported in the newspaper, and I don't think most people would have thought of that angle. But he said it in great sincerity, and when he told me the story, he seemed to be, telling it like it is, and throughout the rest of his life. I mean, it's not something that he mentioned all the time, but if you asked him about it, he did concur. So there was another fellow who just passed away, I think, before Christmas. His name was a country western singer by the name of Johnny Sands. Now, Johnny even worked in some movies with Elvis. Johnny Sands being from the South, I believe, from Tennessee, and I've spoken with him many, many times. Now, back in the late 1960s or early 70s. You'd have to check one of my books. I don't remember the exact date. He was driving towards Las Vegas. He had a record that had just come out, and he wanted to check on the sales to see how the record was doing. And he was on the highway, maybe about 25 minutes from Vegas. And you could just see the lights off in the distance. And this hit the engine of his car, sputtered, and the vehicle stopped. And there was this craft on the side of the road, and two beings approached. And they were very unusual. They had bald heads and ears. Instead of ears, they had appendages like gills or something like that. He got the impression that they came from a watery planet. Anyway, they communicated again with him for about 5 or 10 minutes telepathically, and he asked them at one point, why are you coming here? And one of the beings took his hand from behind his back and came out with a globe, something the size of a basketball or smaller, and all over this little globe that he was holding in their hand were miniature explosions going off. And he said to Johnny Sands, again telepathically, that this is what's going to happen to your planet unless you don't give up your warlike activities and
right.
a bad use of nuclear energy. So
yeah, that seems to be like the recurring theme. That
yes,
that if humans would
Yeah.
put away their expensive toys, they might be able
Yes.
to join the Galactic Federation or join or
Yeah,
get that kind of thing.
Yeah.
That seems to be a very popular theme.
Well, the space people have said on a number of occasions that if they were invited to join as a seat in the United Nations or even in our own Congress, isn't that a joke? That they would welcome to do that, but of course they're not recognized. In the one occasion where UFOs were brought before the UN, there was a number of the president of I can't think of the name, Grenada in the Caribbean, that tried to get to some a bill passed where they would set up an organization to keep track of UFOs and maybe see what was going on, since he figured that UFOs would affect the entire world, which was absolutely true. And the only two countries that voted in favor of it was Grenada and India. The rest of the world's nations, and this is very unusual, including China, Russia, and the United States, would never agree on anything, voted in favor of killing the bill. So it never got any further than they did have a nice program there at the UN. They had a session with Dr. J. Allen Hynek, Jacques Vallée, Gordon Cooper, and the fellow's name was Coyne, who was a helicopter pilot who had a close encounter over Ohio, where this UFO just kind of circled the helicopter that he was in. And it was a nice program. They had I think the Romanian embassy had a little social affair afterwards, and I went to that, and it was all very nice, but it never got anywhere. It was a dead on arrival. So that was the one attempt.
What are your thoughts? Let me ask you about many. There's a lot of you mentioned Admiral J. Byrd earlier. There's a lot of people that are thinking. There's people are searching YouTube and Google Earth, and there's a lot of people that are looking into these theories about the underground bases in Antarctica and the poles. What do you know about that? The poles. And
well, I don't like the cold, so I'm not about to go there. But there's we have the missing diary of Admiral Byrd, and another book which most people don't know about. It's the secret exploits of Admiral Byrd. Now, there was let me see, a Project Paperclip. I believe. I think it was no. I'm a little confused on the name here. Okay, one of the projects was responsible for bringing the ex-Nazis into the country, and then there was another one where Byrd had gotten together a couple of ice cutters and airplanes, and they were going to fly to the South Pole for an expedition, and it was supposed to take them like 6 months to chart the area. Well, he came back in about 3 weeks, and all the men on board of the vessels were sworn to secrecy. They were all members of a secret society that he had formed. Most of them were Masons, but it went even higher than that. And there is also a tie-in between a member of the Byrd family and the JFK assassination. But to get the full story, because I know we're running out of time, you got to read. You got to read the book. And do me a favor, go and buy a book. That's the secret exploits of Admiral Byrd. And if you want some good specials, you can always go to our website, which is conspiracyjournal.com. Go to our bookstore, look around. We get some 2-for-1 offers and things along that line. And don't forget our YouTube channel, which is Mr. UFO's Secret Files. We got over 400 interviews, and we start out every show with a little bit of animation. I've become a cartoon figure in late life.
What's the website's conspiracyjournal.com, and that'll tell you where to go. Conspiracy Journal. Yeah. I'm looking it up. I'm going to pull it up. I have the secret. All right. I have one of the books up. Yeah. Let's see. One of the last week on our show, my co-host James Bills was on here, and we were just buffooning around a little here, talking about Bigfoot. And then at one part of the show last week, James just said, Bigfoot's just blurry.
Bigfoot is what?
Blurry. He's just blurry. He's a blurry guy.
Yeah, he's boring.
Well, he's blurry, and no matter where you whatever happens, you find a picture or a video.
Find him. Oh, yes. Okay.
What does Mr. UFO Timothy Green Beckley think of Bigfoot? Is this something you've covered? Bigfoot
is showing up more and more at locations where UFOs sightings take place. It seems like there are certain window areas or vortexes where there's a gateway to some other dimension, and these creatures and aliens and UFOs come back and forth of their own free will, and sometimes humans disappear to the other side and never return.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the Bigfoot sightings seem to be on the rise. People are always—it's one of the big topics of the cryptozoological topics. Bigfoot is always one of the big ones that people are looking into, and I just didn't know if you had covered or written or had published.
I was. It's not. We've got Weird Winged Wonders, which is a book about cryptoid creatures that fly and attack people, like the Jersey Devil and so forth. And then we got another one. It's Cryptoid Creatures, I think, from Dark Domains, and that's probably not the exact title, but we get into some. Bigfoot was even seen driving a UFO. I mean, there was a fellow up in Wisconsin that I interviewed many years ago, and he claimed that he could see inside the ship. It was kind of transparent, and there at the seated in the command ship was this Chewbacca type creature, but this was before Star Wars even. And he was piloting the craft. Yeah. So, and hey, anyway, I got to get going here.
Oh, okay, that's fine. That's fine. Yeah. But right. well, thank you for giving us an hour of your time. I'm available and on quick notice. In fact, I was on Coast to Coast recently. I had wanted to be on to promote this, UFO and psychic revelations for the 21st century, and I have a good relationship with them. I've been on the program. Like 14 times now. So I was talking to the one of the producers, and I said, I have this new book out. And she said, well, why don't you come on tonight? So there you go. So you just, and I appreciate the short notice. We wanted to get you on. It's been a couple of years since we've had you on, but
love to do it. Yeah. And send me your zine, man.
Yeah,
send me your printed zine.
I'll mail you a copy of Weird Magazine. Yeah. There he goes. That's Timothy Green Beckley, guys. Thanks a lot, Tim, for coming in. All right, there's Timothy Green Beckley, Mr. UFO. He has published tons of work, a big body of work of information coming from Timothy Green Beckley, and wanted to get him on. He's just done a lot of books. 500 honestly. And so we're publishing one of the stories that he had recently written. So I reached out to him to have him on the Weird Show tonight. So wanted to have him on. If you'd like to have an idea for a guest or a show, email us at weirdmagazine@gmail.com. We'd be happy to get a guest on. I'm planning on having pretty soon here, probably Dr. Michael Sala of Exopolitics will be on the show pretty soon. And so we're looking forward to that. And so we're doing it on Wednesdays and Sunday nights, the Weird Show from 9 to 10 p.m. So, come back on Wednesday and we'll be doing this again on Wednesday. And you can check us out there on the Weird Wednesdays that we call it there, doing the Weird Shows as well. And then stay tuned for more paranormal as we get the shows going and more guests Skyping in. So it's Russell signing off for the Weird Show. We'll see you guys on Wednesday later in the week. So thanks for tuning in, guys, and we'll see you guys Wednesday.
Headline edition, July 8, 1947. The Army Air Forces has announced that a flying disc has been found and is now in the possession of the Army. Army officers say the missile, found sometime last week, has been inspected at Roswell, New Mexico, and sent to Wright Field, Ohio, for further inspection.